And we welcome you to another edition of Dolphins in Depth, brought to you by the Miami Herald. I'm Barry Jackson. Omar Kelly is traveling back from Indianapolis today. I'm joined by my colleague, Isaiah Smalls, who does a good job in our Dolphins coverage. And what a day it was at Dolphins camp today. Tua spoke. He is back, at least to practice from his concussion and from his time on IR. And he is going to play on Sunday against Arizona if he clears concussion protocol, which basically requires a couple of more steps of him practicing being the final step, and then two doctors, both a team doctor and an independent neurologist, must clear him to go through that fifth and final stage of concussion protocol. After that, if he continues to have no symptoms, then he is good to go. So a lot to cover here with the press conference, Isaiah, but I guess the takeaway probably for most people is that this was a very salty, indignant Tua today. He seemed annoyed to be up there speaking to us, and I can totally understand that for this reason. Tua does not like being the poster child of concussions for the NFL, and this is what he has essentially become, and it's almost as if there's a double standard. Now, it's a double standard in his best interest to look out for him, but it's almost as if there's a double standard because of the history of the concussions and the public relations around what happened to him in 2022, that doctors are going to be extra cautious. There's no doctor with his history of concussions who's going to say, yeah, he can come back in a week or two. So we're going to continue seeing Tua out longer than other quarterbacks would be after concussions. And yes, it's in his best interest. You can ask the question, did he have to sit out 5 weeks instead of 4 weeks? I think that's fair to ask. But the bottom line is the Dolphins did what they think was in his best interest after doctors told them that he needed extended time out. So whether it was 4 weeks, whether it was 5 weeks, you can quibble with the IR decision. But basically, the Dolphins made the decision that they thought was in the young man's best interest. And because of that, I don't think you can criticize them for that, even though a case could be made that he might have been able to play last Sunday. What was your big takeaway from the press conference? So we're going to get to everything he said, Isaiah, but what stood out to you?
Man, they have awakened villain Tua. That was my biggest takeaway. I think a lot of times, I know players don't really pay attention to the media, right? It's probably in their best interest not to, right? But it's the year 2024. Like, it's impossible not to hear something, right? And obviously all the talk about whether he's going to retire or he should give up the game. Look, he's not having it. He said that there was zero discussions about retirement, right? And so up there on that podium, he looked, defiant, all those adjectives you used. I mean, he just wants to get back to football. And I think that's why he held the press conference earlier in the week, just to get it out the way. And he just wants to get back to playing football.
Yep. And it's funny that he was very sparse in his answers. We thought maybe we'd see the Tua who was so jovial with reporters and more at ease with reporters earlier this season. But again, I can understand how he feels. He's tired of this. He's tired of dealing with concussions. He's tired of the league casting an eye on him about concussions. He's tired of people telling him whether he should play or not. So a few more things I want to go over with everyone who hasn't seen some of Tua's comments or read on our website or others, some of what he said today. Tua made clear that he never seriously considered retirement, which was a different position from what he said following the last concussion on Christmas Day against Green Bay, which concluded a stretch, as everyone knows, of 2 confirmed concussions, but probably 3 concussions within a 3-month period back in 2022. He said he very much wants to play. The lines that stood out today, I love this game and I love it to the death of me. That was pretty eyebrow-raising. Yep. And he says, I'm willing to play the odds with regard to future health. And I think one of the things, Isaiah, is there's so much gray area, as Tua correctly said, regarding consequences of numerous concussions long-term. Neurologists and neurosurgeons will tell you that having a lot of concussions does increase the risk of developing cognitive disorders later on, whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's or CTE. However, there's no assurance you're going to get it. And even though it would be a safer lifestyle decision for Tua not to play, it's his life. It's his decision to make. I think what surprised people maybe a little bit was just how bluntly he phrased it. And he made no attempt to even talk about the risks of his health and having concern about it. It's not like he minimized that. He just didn't even want to address it. He just he made clear he wants to play. And that left me with the impression that if he has additional concussions that are deemed to be mild where symptoms either don't exist or they go away quickly, he'll probably try to come back and play from all of them, because this is his life and this is his decision. By the way, he said he had no symptoms at all following the incident itself, September 12th against Buffalo. Obviously, he had some fencing with the hands, which was worrisome, but no symptoms after that.
The next day, he said he felt symptomless, which is crazy. I've had concussions, and that's never happened to me. You always feel it at least a week.
How about his decision, Isaiah, not to wear a Guardian cap? So some studies have indicated that it reduces the risk of concussions, but then no data has been published on this, and it's not entirely certain that wearing this protective headgear will reduce the chance of a concussion. Some players have. We saw Devon Achane wear one on Sunday for the Dolphins against the Colts. We've seen the Bills safety Rapp wearing it the last couple of weeks. Do you think this is a risky decision, or can you understand him not doing it?
I don't want to say it's risky because the data isn't full out, but I will say this. I think that as a player, it's up to you to protect yourself as much as possible, right? And I think wearing a Guardian cap would have been a great decision for him. But if he doesn't want to do it, like you said, it's his life. I can't. What am I going to tell him? Oh, you have to wear a Guardian cap. No. If he doesn't feel comfortable with it, for whatever reason, whether it's the weight of it, you can feel it, or it's kind of affecting his head motions, I understand it. And what is very much true about the Guardian cap, though, it is designed to reduce the impact of collisions, right? And so, like that to me, like if I was in his position, yes, I probably would wear it. But at the same time, I'm not. I'm speaking to you from my laptop, so I'm not in his shoes. And if he doesn't want to wear it, I mean, that's his decision.
Right. And I'm like you. I prefer he wear it. I think he's got nothing to lose to wear it. He clearly didn't want to explain why he decided not to wear it. He said personal decision, left it at that, didn't expand on it. So I'm not sure we'll ever know the reason. I think it'd be wrong to conclude it's because of aesthetics. There could be other factors that would be more important to him than that. But he chose not to go down that road. What's going to be interesting to me, how much the risk of concussion, knowing that Tua is likely more vulnerable to concussions than the average person, how much of that will affect the Dolphins' play calling? McDaniel said there weren't going to be major schematic changes as a result, but both he and Tua both said, look, Tua's got to be smart about this. Tua himself said, I've got to stay more available for the team and my guys. McDaniel said he's got to protect himself more. You'll recall, Isaiah, today in the press conference, McDaniel was asked about one of the first risky plays that Tua made when he came back from the Bengals concussion in 2022 when he lowered his head into a Steelers defender in that Sunday night game when he came back in 2022. McDaniel made clear he doesn't want to see any of that. So then the question is this: does this take off the table certain plays on 3rd and 4th and short? Does this rule out quarterback sneaks? Would it make him less likely to call plays where Tua doesn't have, I don't want to say max protection because you're obviously not going to always max protect, but where Tua might be more vulnerable? How much does Tua's risk of concussion enter into play calling? That to me is going to be fascinating. How much should it impact play calling, do you think?
I mean, honestly, I don't think it should because of where Tua said he is, right? He said he's felt fine forever. He said he's been throwing the ball. I think you got to trust your players at this point. And obviously, Mike McDaniel is a very players first coach, right? So I believe he will trust his quarterback. I know, if you listen to the commentary of the Colts game, they talked a lot about Anthony Richardson and how, his last, 2 years have been cut short just with injuries, right? He hasn't been able to play the full allotment of games. And he even talked to his coach about, trying to either slide differently or, run out of bounds. And I think it's the same thing for Tua. Like, if you look at that particular play and what happened when he collided with Damar Hamlin, he was trying to get a few extra yards. For what reason? Because they were down and he was trying to, generate a spark, right? And that's fine. I can respect what he did as a competitor, but at the same time, it's what, 5 weeks removed from that. You just got to play smart. You just got to play smart, and I think he knows that. And I think McDaniel is going to, understands that as well, and is not going to hold back at all.
Yeah, no more headfirst slides. We can't see anything like the hit that resulted in the concussion against Buffalo. And I guess what worries everyone, and neurologists have made this point to me, is that it was not a particularly brutal or violent or egregious hit that left him concussed. So that's what has everyone so worried about his future. Now, even with that known, there was not a single neurologist who told him he should retire, and all of them said he would be fine to play moving forward. Now, obviously, no doctor can ever assure that the concussions are not going to add up and eventually there'll be long-term cognitive consequences, but none of the doctors told him he needs to stop playing. And I asked a couple local neurologists from the local spine and brain center in South Florida whether they could ever envision a scenario where neurologists would tell Tua he can't continue playing. Would there be a certain number of concussions that would cause that? And they all said no, they would not envision that happening unless his symptoms don't go away. That would be the one instance where several neurologists have told me they could see Tua being advised to retire. But in this case, he had no symptoms at all. After the night that it happened with the fencing, he had no symptoms the next day. Everyone knows he went to Disney on Ice that next day. So I think that was interesting. What also is clear, Isaiah, from my discussions with neurologists the past few weeks, is that any future concussion is going to sideline him for an extended period, even if it's very mild without symptoms, because no neurologist is going to say, yeah, let's put a guy out there who's had 5 or 6 concussions out there very quickly, or as quickly as other quarterbacks are put out there after concussions. Everyone is going to be cautious. One of the neurologists told me, look, we traditionally err on the side of caution. So Tua has the history working against him, and that's why obviously the Dolphins need to protect themselves with a better backup quarterback going forward. I want to bring up this to you also, get your thoughts on this, that the Tua line today, and there were a bunch of them that were memorable and that people will cite off this press conference, but one of them was this. I asked Tua if he thinks he'll ever be tempted to sort of push back if doctors tell him, look, even though you have no symptoms, you got to sit out 5 or 6 weeks. Not that Tua would ultimately control it, because the team would control it. And he didn't say that he wouldn't push back. He said that he's frustrated by the whole thing. He said, quote, this is only becoming a thing because of what happened 2 years ago. We don't look at hockey players and boxers the same way. It's becoming more of an issue here in the league. So do you get to his frustration? Do you think it's reasonable that he should have to sit out longer than most players? I know we're going into science here, but yeah, what's your thoughts on that, Isaiah?
Yeah, I totally understand his frustration, because even in football, the concussion to a quarterback is handled way differently. I think we noticed that, how the Dolphins handled Teron Armstead and Devon Achane. They didn't sit out for extended periods of time. They didn't go on IR. They were back within 2 weeks, right? And so, like, context is always important to me, right? And I understand his frustrations, but I think that's linked to what you said earlier, right? He does not want to be the face of concussions in the NFL, like, bar none. He just doesn't want that, right? The man led the league in passing yards last year. Like, that's what he wants to be known as, right? He wants to be known as a quarterback that is in a high-powered offense that scores a lot of points and wins, right? That's ultimately what he wants to be a part of. And so I get it. I understand his frustration, but the reality of the situation is, look, you've had 2 of the worst concussions that we've seen. 3, if you're counting the most recent one. Like, that's context is so important in that. And so and also we can't leave out the fact that those all happened in primetime games, right? So there was just a lot more eyeballs on you, right? And so I get it. I totally understand the frustration. He just wants to go out and ball, right? But at the same time, you can't strip the context of the situation. So right. I get your frustration, but at the same time, you can't be mad that people are genuinely concerned for your health.
Yeah, and you can't be mad about the fact that the Dolphins and doctors want to be cautious with you. And that's why I don't think you can criticize the Dolphins for the IR decision, even though science has suggested, I cited this study on Twitter, that if you have a mild concussion, especially one without symptoms, brain function returns to normal within 30 days. He's going to go 46 games between starts. So you could make the case that he would have been fine to play, considering he had no symptoms since that first night yesterday against Indianapolis. By putting him on IR, the Dolphins prevented that from happening. So I think it's a fair discussion point. I don't second guess or criticize the Dolphins, because, again, they're doing what they thought was in the young man's best interest based on advice of doctors. At the same time, you also could make the point, well, if they had kept him on the roster and he could have played yesterday, would you have rather had Tua yesterday, or would you have rather had, say, Tanner Connor. I'm just thinking of the 53rd man on the roster. But ultimately, the Dolphins felt like they wanted to take the stress off Tua about when he might return and just give him a month on the sideline. And so I don't think you can fault them for that. If Tua faults the Dolphins for putting him on IR, he certainly wasn't letting on today. He was asked directly by Cameron Wolfe about did the Dolphins do the right thing by putting him on IR, and he said, quote, "What I know is the team is in the best interest of me. Given what the doctors have told me, having a substantial amount of time to rest and recover, they did what was best, protecting me from myself." So Tua was very understanding of that. I thought the other great quote from the presser, Isaiah, was this. When he was asked to close the press conference about how much risk he's taking by continuing to play, he said, "How much risk do we take when we get up in the morning and drive to work? You can get in a car accident. There's risks in any and everything. Every time we all suit up, we're all taking a risk. We could potentially get hurt. I'm willing to play the odds. That's it." So that, was a kind of a startling conclusion to really what was an eyebrow-raising press conference, just to see how indignant he was, how irritated he is that this is an issue for him. And again, my biggest takeaway was Tua could have 2 or 3 more mild concussions, and I'm left with the impression, as I think a lot of people are, he's going to keep playing through it. I hope his determination to keep playing through concussions does not at all impact how the Dolphins handle quarterback moving forward. If there's a very good quarterback in the first round of the draft available to them next year who they have a conviction about, I don't want them to be influenced by the fact that Tua wants to continue playing, because ultimately it might not be his decision. If Tua has multiple more concussions, and God forbid if he does, but if he does, he's obviously going to be out an extended period, and the Dolphins have to protect themselves, first of all, by signing a better backup in March in free agency, whether it's Joe Flacco or Andy Dalton or somebody else next March. And then second of all, I'm not on the train that some people are of you have to draft a quarterback next year. But if there's one you like who's available in the first or second round and you have a conviction about him, I would be open to it. How would you handle backup quarterback and adding other quarterbacks to the roster moving forward, Isaiah, knowing that obviously what they did this year was simply not good enough?
Yeah, so I think this is a very tricky situation, right? I think because this is where the human emotion comes in, right? Because if the Dolphins draft a quarterback in the first round, the fans are going to say, well, the minute that Tua messes up, it's, well, throw in that guy, right? And so now you're dealing with an internal quarterback situation. I think back to what happened with the Eagles, Carson Wentz, and them drafting Jalen Hurts. It was an insurance plan, right? But how did that work out? Obviously, it worked out kind of fine, right? But it during the actual time when Carson Wentz is the starter and Jalen Hurts is the backup, it did not work out fine. It was very clear that Carson Wentz was pissed, right? And so I think, and it's throughout history, right? You look at Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. Like, this is throughout history in the NFL. When another quarterback comes in who is thought to be the successor, right, it causes friction. So I think you have to evaluate where Tua is mentally, right? Like, will he understand that, look, this is still your franchise, right? There's still that picture of you side by side with Dan Marino in our office, right? You're still the guy. However, it's smart football to get a succession plan in place before it all hits the fan. And now
he has another concussion and he's out for the season. Exactly. They have to start looking out for themselves. And this is nothing against Tua, but the question is, who's looking out for the franchise? Has anybody been looking out for the franchise? They gave Tua all of this money, which he deserves based on his play, and he's a good guy and everything. But obviously it was an unwise decision because they didn't give significant thought to the risk of another concussion, even though he had a history of traumatic brain injuries. So that proved to be a mistake. Even if he's healthy for the rest of his career, which we all hope for, you could make the case that the Dolphins ended up overpaying because what he would have gotten in free agency this offseason would have been substantially less than what they ended up paying him because he had another concussion. We all hope he doesn't have another one, but the Dolphins obviously misplayed it by giving him the extension when they did not have to. They could have controlled his rights for the next 3 years. So it's time someone looks out for the Dolphins. It's great they look out for their players, but who's minding the store? Who's looking out for the franchise? That has to happen, and you can't worry about players' feelings. Did Mike Tomlin worry about upsetting Justin Fields when he put in Russell Wilson last night, a decision which looked really good in retrospect when everyone was criticizing it? So you have to look out for the franchise, do what's best for them, not worry about Tua and his feelings or anybody's feelings. And look, he's a big boy. He will understand because of the concussion issues that the franchise has to protect themselves. And of course, we don't know a large part of the story with regard to what's going to happen next March. The rest of the story is, will he stay healthy the rest of the year? And I think the other thing is this. Even though we know he's a good quarterback, even though he has 2 years of quality body of work by and large, including leading the league, passer rating 1 year and passing yardage last year, despite all of that, he needs to be better against very good defenses and playoff level teams. So if he comes back and struggles against those teams, that also has to factor into the decision. That's not to say that if he's not great in those games, they should replace him this offseason, but at least give yourself other options if that remains an issue. So I think quarterback has to stay open-ended, but the one thing we know for sure is that they need to get a better backup next season. And on the quarterback topic, we should tell people that as of Monday, McDaniel said there was no determination on the severity of Tyler Huntley's shoulder injury, but it doesn't look like he's going to be playing in the immediate future. Skylar Thompson told me last week the deep throws were still causing him discomfort with his ribs. He hopes to be able to be back to full strength, so possibly he could be Tua's backup against Arizona. If not, it'll be Tim Boyle. So that's what's going on with quarterback. Let's talk about receiver. There's a lot to cover here. How in the world, Isaiah, do you have 69 offensive plays in a game and Tyreek Hill touches the ball 2 of those 69 plays? Jalen Waddle touches the ball once. Is this ever justified?
No. This is the thing that I was talking about before you jumped on. I just don't understand. Like I understand that like this is a very complicated offense and like that's part of the magic, right? What I fail to understand is why you don't have certain simple plays to get Tyreek Hill the ball and Jalen Waddle the ball. Why is it that we had to wait until the last drive in the fourth quarter, a potential game-winning drive, for Tyreek Hill to run a comeback and him to get hit with the ball? That's just my big question. I just don't understand why you don't have just very simple plays to get these guys the ball in space. Like, it's not like, you know, they're not possession receivers as well. They can take the ball and run with it as well. So, like, the end around is cute, right? That's fine. I respect that. But there has to be a simpler way. Send him on a slant. Send him on a drag route. I would have loved to see Tyreek Hill on a drag route because that's where he can get into space and use his speed. And look, like, I understand that, you know, Tyreek Hill is still holding on to, like, I'm still the best receiver in the league. And sure, like, as of those rankings you are, and as of, you know, your own perception you are, but there are receivers out here doing more with less, right? And so you think about what Justin Jefferson's doing with the Vikings, right? Like, there's, you know, I just don't understand why there aren't simple concepts that will get these 2 elite receivers the ball in space. Like, that to me, when I was watching the game last night, it was baffling to me that it really took so long for them to get the ball.
I think it's very fair to criticize McDaniel for that yesterday. There's just no excuse for the lack of involvement. I like the game plan early, running the ball a lot. You can understand the thinking of going to Jonnu Smith because he was the one who wasn't attracting double coverage or cloud coverage or 2 high safeties. But that being said, your point is right on. Get Tyreek and Waddle a handful of touches with screens or with slants or with anything that's simple enough for Tyler Huntley to do. And the fact that it didn't happen is just stunning to me. You cannot waste 2 of your highest paid players and best assets on offense like they did. And as far as how much accountability each shares, I don't think Tyreek and Jalen were at all to blame for yesterday. They could have been better in previous weeks. Certainly, Tyreek had a couple of drops. Walls had a couple of drops. So in general, they need to be better. They need to be at their best when Tua comes back. But yesterday was the first day that McDaniel's play calling irritated me in terms of the lack of involvement for Tyreek and Waddle. Since I would say last time I was this irritated with McDaniel play calling would be the Buffalo game in the snow a couple of years ago where Mostert was averaging 8 yards a pop and they went away from him late in the game. I still think McDaniel is a good coach. I think he's a good play caller in general, but yesterday I don't think was his finest moment. He needs to get his playmakers the ball beyond Jonnu Smith. The other news on receiver, Braxton Berrios going on IR on Monday with a knee injury. His agent, Drew Rosenhaus, told Josh Moser of WSBN Fox locally that he believed it was a serious injury. So he's gone. They're going to need a punt kickoff returner Eskridge, who's on the practice squad, is an option. Tyreek and Jalen would be options if the Dolphins choose to go in that direction. River Craycraft would be an option long-term. However, he's not practicing yet as he works his way back on IR from a shoulder injury. River has been designated to return before the season, so he will be back this year. It's just a question of when. And then I want to ask you about Odell Beckham. He had identical stat lines the first two games. 11 offensive snaps against New England, 11 offensive snaps against the Colts, 0 for 2 throwing to him each time. One of the local sportscasters said that the drop over the middle, I think Josh Moser, speaking of him, he said last night in a Sunday night show, that was a business decision by Odell to not go for that ball over the middle. I know Odell's already becoming such a magnet for criticism. I think it's premature. He had a knee injury. He's doing the best he can. That being said, that particular play didn't leave the best impression, no?
No, definitely not. But I think, he's still working out the nuances of this offense, right? I mean, we have 2 games. It's a small sample size, right? It hasn't been particularly wowing, right? But then again, you have to realize that this isn't the same OBJ who caught that one-handed pass that wowed audiences across the country. Like, that was a decade ago. People don't understand that was a decade ago. And so you have to expect some sort of wear and tear for a guy that has been one of the brightest stars in the league since he entered it, right? And so, look, I think he'll be better with Tua, at the helm of the offense. But I wouldn't be concerned yet. I just wrote a story last week about why I wasn't concerned about him yet. I think once Tua gets back, once he can, finally figure out the subtle nuance of the offense, because remember, he's still not in football shape, I'd have to guess, right? Like, last week was his second full week of practice, right? So I think this week, week 3, he's now playing with the starting quarterback. It will get better. It has to get better. It has to get better.
Yeah, it does have to get better. And I'm with you. I think it's too soon to judge him. You want to see him with Tua. Couple other topics I wanted to touch on before we go. Outside linebacker, no Ogba yesterday. They came into the game without a single healthy outside linebacker with a sack this season. They leave the game without a single healthy outside linebacker with a sack this season. Chop Robinson wasn't awful yesterday, but he really made no impact. He did not have a pressure in 16 pass rushing chances, obviously remains without a sack in his rookie season. They did drop him into coverage 4 times, but he was never targeted. Their only pass rush yesterday came from the guy who hadn't played all season. Speaking of outside linebackers, I'm not including, obviously, defensive linemen in this, but Mo Kamara, his NFL regular season debut, rushed the passer 8 times, got pressures on 2 of them, but there was not a single other pressure from their edge players. Tyus Bowser and Robinson each played high 30s in snaps, 38 for Chop, 37 for Bowser. Quentin Bell played only 9. None of those 3 got a single pressure on the quarterback. So Chop Robinson very much on the spot. We have to see what he can produce. I want to give a shout out, Isaiah, to Kader Kohu and Ramsey, who I think have been excellent this season. Ramsey, not only did he allow only 8 yards in completions yesterday, he rushed the quarterback 6 times. He had pressures on 4 of them and 2 quarterback hits. And I was pleased to see some blitzing of defensive backs by Anthony Weaver. Hasn't done a ton of it this year. Did some yesterday. I thought it worked against Anthony Richardson. Kohu has a passer rating against in the 50s this year. He's been really good coming off his struggles last year. 0 for 3 were Colts, were Anthony Richardson yesterday when he targeted Kohu. So Kader Kohu deserves a gold star for getting back to his rookie season. Anyone else you want to touch on? Any other position, anything that stood out to you yesterday?
Before I answer that question, just to tie a nice little bow on the edge rushing stuff, I think that the blitzes from the defensive back position were Weaver's way of trying to get some pressure from the edge, because he very clearly saw that it wasn't working either. And so, I saw Jordan Poyer was in there on a few as well. So it looked like, that from that aspect of it, that looked promising. And that might be something that they don't want to totally, throw out when Ogba gets healthy and, later down the line when Chubb gets healthy. But to answer your question, I'm just so impressed with Zach Sealer and Calais Campbell. I think people were wondering, with Christian Wilkins gone, oh, what is Zach Sealer going to do, right? And he's been playing at a Pro Bowl level, if not all pro level. And I think that that's very, very, that's amazing. And then with Calais Campbell, like he's defying age. I think he had 2 tackles for losses yesterday. Like he's, for whatever reason, they said it countless times throughout the preseason that like, yeah, he doesn't look his age. And like, you take that with a grain of salt, right? Until you see it live against an opponent that doesn't wear the aqua and orange. And I mean, he's a monster out there. Like age truly is not a number. I just want to shout out the interior defensive line, and as well as Deshaun Hand. Deshaun Hand has been doing very well all season as well. So I just want to shout out the defensive line for actually creating some pressure and doing their thing for sure.
Agree. And Jordan Brooks has played well this year. Did a good job yesterday. The Colts were over 3 when targeting him, so that was important. Final thought on running back. There are tough decisions they've got to make as far as how to allocate snaps. Mostert, obviously, we saw the costly fumble yesterday. It was only his 12th in 710 career carries, the 6th in 34 games with the Dolphins. Jalen Wright was their best runner yesterday, and I say that even while noting that Achane played well and Mostert played well aside from the fumble. Wright played only 6 snaps on Sunday. I think he's got to play a little more, and I think most Dolphins fans will agree that as much as everyone loves Alec Ingold and he's a great leader, I think giving him the ball has probably run its course. Right? It hasn't worked now. 3 consecutive 3rd or 4th and short yardages, and he has 2 fumbles and 8 rushing attempts. There's nobody on the team who cares more, but for whatever reason, it's just not working out. So I think a decision looms there. Who would you give the most carries to? Do you go with Achane? How would you balance them out?
So I think with McDaniel, he always rides the hot hand, right? So I think you start with Achane, bring in Mostert, and then bring in Jalen Wright as well. I think let's not forget Mostert had a 32-yard run called back because of holding, right? So his numbers look totally different if you add that 32-yard run, right? And so, of course, the fumble is costly, right? You can never do that. You can never put the ball on the ground as a running back. But I think you do have to give more time to Jalen Wright because Jalen Wright was by far your best running back, 2 weeks ago about a week ago, right? So I think him only having less than 10 snaps, that you can't do that. I think just for the sake of trying to see who has the hot hand, you got to give him some more touches. I'm a firm fan of what Kobe said. Like you're not even in the game if you don't take a shot, right? So and if you're a superstar, you got to take superstar shots, right? So I'm a firm believer of getting all 3 of them, maybe equal touches, just to see where they are on each series, and then okay, cool. Well, these 2 are obviously having a day. Let's go with them and let's ride them for the rest.
Right, then ride the hot day in the second half. Totally with you on that. Isaiah, I enjoyed it. Omar will be back on Wednesday. He's walking home from Indianapolis. Maybe he's in Kentucky. Maybe he's in Tennessee. I don't know where he is, but he'll be back on the show on Wednesday. Jackson, thanks for joining us. We'll see you later this week.
Peace, guys.